public inquiry into COVID, we know that's been banging on, don't we, for a while, has already cost the government more than £100 million so far. That's on top, that's plus nearly 200 million spent on the inquiry itself. So that 100 million is the cost to government to get lawyers and to fight things in the courts and to do all of that kind of thing. For example, they had to go to court, the High Court, to fight the fact that Boris Johnson didn't want to release his WhatsApp messages and I think his diary. Do you remember that? They went to court over that. Well, that cost, I say the government, that cost us for the inquiry to take them to court. So our money taking them to court and our money paying for the defence in that court. Yeah, it's a good game if you can get on it, isn't it? Government spending covers legal advice and staffing. The last count, the team of 248 people were working across key departments to produce evidence for the inquiry. Inquiry sources questioned the approach, saying that the government at times have been hostile and difficult, blocking the release of information and delivering documents late. The Cabinet Office, though, said it was committed to the inquiry and to providing blah, 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 blah. We know all that stuff, don't we? Blah, blah, blah. Well, Darwin Friend joins me now, Research Director at the Taxpayers Alliance. Good to see you, Darwin. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. It just seems preposterous to me that we were paying both defence and prosecution in a High Court case. Those lawyers must have been high-fiving each other in the bar.
Well, first of all, good evening, Petrie. Thanks very much for having me on the show. And quite rightly what you say. I mean, I think if you're a lawyer, it's a good job to have these days at the minute, because you can either work for the COVID inquiry itself or you can be working for the government and be getting a good payday at the end of it. I mean, when we look at the costs that we're looking at from the Cabinet Office, we're seeing over £100 million, as you say, spent by the government on this. But then furthermore, on top of that, you've got, as you mentioned, £200 million that the COVID inquiry itself has cost so far. Now, of that, over 100 million of that 200 million is legal costs on their side as well. And so I think the message to take away from all of this is, if you want to have a good payday at the minute, let's be a lawyer involved in the COVID inquiry, because they're definitely the ones raking it in at our expense.
I mean, I don't know why anybody hasn't sort of looked at this and gone, well, that is, we're getting the public to pay both sides of this. This is actually crazy, and we're the ones that stand to lose. I mean, the problem with these public inquiries, look, we all know how breathtakingly expensive they are. The Savile inquiry was £195 million, the Grenfell inquiry 178, the child sexual abuse inquiry 186. I could go on, but they always come in more expensive than we're told as the general public. But whatever happens after them, I mean, that's the thing, that so many inquiries that end, whether they be public inquiries or other inquiries, there doesn't seem to be anything concrete that happens afterwards.
No, I completely agree. And you mentioned some of the statutory public inquiries we've had since the Inquiries Act was created in 2005. Well, the COVID inquiry is set to be the most expensive of any of those inquiries. So we've had 22 that have been completed so far. COVID inquiry, we've been doing a regular estimate at the Taxpayers Alliance to see how much it's going to cost, which funnily enough, the COVID inquiry initially said, oh, you're overestimating, you're being far too unfair, when we initially forecast it to be 150 million back in, I believe it was early 2023. Well, we're already over that now. It's 192 million, as you say, and we've currently estimated it's going to cost almost 250 million pounds by the end of this process. And as
plus whatever it costs the government to
exactly.
fight it. So we're actually looking at nearer 350 million,
at
400 million. Yeah.
Yes, exactly, at the very least, because obviously the 100 million that you mentioned that the government has declared it spent was just from April of 2023 through to June of 2025. So those costs are going to continue to rise as well. So if we get away from this shy of 400 million, I'll be extremely surprised at this rate. But I think the more important point as well is what you just mentioned is what is learned as a result of these things. I mean, the COVID inquiry is set to have 10 modules that it's going to complete. It's so far only completed 2 of those. And I think what's been the problem so much is what they've actually reported on hasn't been issues that we can actually resolve, or here was wasted money and this is options to rectify that so it doesn't happen again in a future scenario if it were to ever happen. All we seem to have heard about is gossip in number 10 and then bizarre hypocritical recommendations in their latest module where they said that the government shouldn't have put in lockdowns. They should have actually just continued with the 2-metre distancing and the face masks, but then at the same time said that Boris Johnson should have acted quicker and more decisively on lockdowns. It seems to be that we're not learning anything of this. All that seems to be happening is taxpayers' money is just being spent, so then it's keeping lawyers in well-paid jobs.
I mean, some inquiries, like the Dunblane inquiry, did bring about stricter gun laws. That seemed to be a very obvious answer to protect future generations. Piper Alpha reforms in offshore work, and I suppose Grenfell, although a lot of the victims feel completely dissatisfied with any result, there was a change to building regulations. But a lot of these are victim-led, right? There's a lot of victims that come forward in these situations who say, look, we want an inquiry. Do you think that the inquiries of this nature kind of rather oversell themselves, that people want a resolution, or they want people to be exposed, but very rarely are they?
Yeah, I completely understand that, and I understand why people want to have these inquiries. I mean, especially when it comes to COVID, a lot of money was spent during the COVID inquiry, a lot of big decisions that were made that impacted everyone across the entire country. And I fully understand why groups such as the COVID-19 Bereaved Families group do want to see an inquiry on this to see what lessons could be learned, and also hold those people that made those decisions to account. But I also agree with them when they say, as they did in this report, or in this article that was written up by the BBC today, that this inquiry is just taking far too long and it's not being effective whatsoever. I don't think there's a problem with having inquiries when major things have happened and major problems have potentially occurred in the public sector. But I think, frankly, what the government needs to do, of whatever colour it is at any time, is to actually make sure these inquiries are getting on with the job and are swift, decisive and effective, so that then any actions that they do recommend can actually take place. Because my concern is these sort of processes, they drag on and on and on, and they have so many different modules, as the COVID inquiry does, that effectively none of the recommendations are ever picked up. And so I think what the government now needs to be doing is putting pressure on the COVID inquiry to actually make some decisive action and decisive recommendations that they can actually take away from this, so that then we can wrap up this inquiry once and for all, and that we can stop bleeding money that is ultimately taxpayers at the end of the day, which they're now being taxed more from, to keep paying for it.
Well, interesting, isn't it? Because the cost of this inquiry is almost exactly matches one of the Chancellor's budget requests, and that's the mansion tax. It completely wipes that out. I mean, this is the nature of the amount of money that we're talking about here, and also there's an issue, isn't there, with how addicted we are to public inquiries. We've got more public inquiries going on now at the highest level than any point in history. And I wonder if, because a lot of people are very dissatisfied when nothing seems to change after an inquiry. We've got the Post Office and Horizon inquiry going on here. Now, if that was going to decide that Horizon, Fujitsu, whoever, has to pay the compensation bill, I'd be all for it. Perhaps they could be charged for the inquiry as well, right? But the fact that it probably won't do that they don't really make those sort of very strong recommendations, means this seems to be not a waste of money, because we need to know, we know what went wrong with Fujitsu and Horizon. What is an extremely expensive, very long-winded inquiry really going to achieve?
Well, in the case of the Post Office scandal as well, I saw today that Fujitsu is still actually trying to get contracts, and I believe it's being successful in getting government contracts as well. So, I mean, we don't need an inquiry to say that they shouldn't be getting government contracts. It should just be they've clearly had a major issue with the Post Office, and they shouldn't be getting more contracts in that instance if that's what the government wants. We don't need to simply set up an inquiry which drags on for years and years and costs endless millions, when those are simple common sense decisions that I think me, you and all of your listeners can quite easily come to. But I think this is simply a culture that we have in our politics right now, which is whenever there's a problem, we have to, rather than have politicians that make decisive actions, we have to farm it off either to an independent inquiry or an independent quango to make the difficult decisions instead, and actually just farm off responsibility to them. I think we need to get back to that culture of politicians actually being proper representatives of the people and ultimately making decisions that I think everyone can come to terms with and understand. They just need to have the political leaders in place who are willing to make that case for them. And in the process of doing that, not only will that make them more authoritative and be able and let them make decisions that really affect the country more themselves rather than just farming it off, but it's also going to, most importantly as well, mean that we're not wasting more and more of taxpayers' money and then having to come back to them with further and further tax rises, as you mentioned, in pernicious taxes such as the mansion tax that they announced, or the milkshake tax even as well. Rather than imposing those, why don't we cut out the costs and just implement some common sense decisions instead of setting up these inquiries?
Did you feel that, I mean, this is more political really, but there's just that lack of will to take responsibility. We see this all the time with politicians now. You know, let's, like you said, let's leave this up to somebody else to make the harsh decisions. I'm not having anything to do with it. But it doesn't fool the public, right? We're not as dumb as they think we are. And when we see bills like this, I mean, £101 million just on the government getting a few bits of paper together and having to spend half of that on lawyers. It just seems to be absolutely disgraceful because it's not their money, right? It's our money. They don't really care. They're not. This is why these things drag on for sometimes a decade.
Yeah, because ultimately the people that are working on these inquiries aren't the ones paying for it. It's all of us. And as you say, the tax burden is continuously rising. It's set to reach a record high, I believe, as of April 2027. And even on this bill alone that we've had so far for the COVID inquiry, so that's the 192 million from the COVID inquiry itself, plus the 101 million from the government that's been reported today. Well, if you were to divide that by the average lifetime tax that a household would pay, which is just below £1.3 million, which is staggering in and of itself, but that means there's 230 average households in the country that will pay taxes their entire lives just to pay for the COVID inquiry costs so far. And this is the thing, is sort of like, I think people don't mind chipping in and paying their taxes, but they actually want to see something in return for it. And so often with these inquiries, as we see throughout the rest of the public sector, when big decisions are farmed off to independent quangos who aren't directly responsible or accountable to the public, is that money just gets wasted. And that's unsurprising given that they're not accountable to the public, but it needs to be curbed out. And we need to have ministers that are going to call it out and actually bring power back to them so that then we can hold them accountable for the decisions they make with our money.
The other problem with these inquiries is that they lack legal authority in themselves. They lack the legal power. So they spend all these years, and probably a massive tea and biscuit bill as well, on reaching conclusions that they can't actually enforce, that they can just advise. You know, well, we think it probably was them and they probably should do this, but we can't. We're paper tigers. We can't do anything. Would there be something to say that they should be given more power to implement some of that? I mean, I don't even know what came out of the Savile inquiry. I mean, I don't even know what happened there, but there you go. Do you think that they need that? Because also there's slow implementation. They don't, you know, it takes when they finish the inquiry, it can take 2 years to deliver the inquiry. 2 years. What are they doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the great thing about that these inquiries do is they provide very glossy reports, which look great on the shelf, but unfortunately I think that's where they spend most of their time, to be honest, gathering dust rather than actually being implemented. And I think there needs to be perhaps a little bit of a combined strategy from what we've been talking about so far on this, which is one, we don't need to have as many inquiries.
21 ongoing at the moment, yeah.
Precisely, 21 ongoing. We don't need to be having that many inquiries. Some of them can be resolved by ministers without having to farm them out to an independent inquiry. But then at the same time, those that then we do think are important enough to deserve an inquiry into them, such as potentially the COVID inquiry itself, is we actually beef those up a little bit more so that then they do have some form of legal powers that ministers have to implement their recommendations. And I think that would actually make the inquiries themselves a little bit more responsible and grown up than they're currently being. Rather than talking about text messages in number 10, we'd actually be talking about pandemic preparedness, we'd be talking about the use of taxpayers' money, all of these things that fundamentally the inquiry should be about. And if it were given those powers, then I think it potentially could. But I think that has to come in combination with not having so many inquiries in the first place, because there will naturally always be things that perhaps the inquiry recommends which the government doesn't want to take on itself, and they should have that ability to do so if they think it necessary. But I think in these big, really important national inquiries such as this one, then perhaps it's worth beefing them up in return for as I say, cutting down the number of inquiries which we have in total.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, if this inquiry was about, look, how do we prepare better for another pandemic, which many people say is around the corner, that would be okay. If we felt there was some value for this money, then you would feel, okay, well, it's a lot of money, but at least it means next time we'll have enough spare food, we'll have enough, whatever it might be. But we never see that, do we?
No, and I think that's the real case that we have across the entire public sector at the minute, as I think taxpayers are reasonable people. They've got common sense. They know what they're talking about. And the thing is that when they see value for money, they are happy to pay for those things. But the issue we have too far and too often right now across the public sector is they're not getting that service. And these inquiries just another example about it. I think before the inquiry was actually set up, plenty of people would have said this is a perfectly sensible thing to do. We should really have an inquiry to look at what was done during the pandemic and where we could do better. But that needs to be swift, decisive and efficient so that then we can have effective decision making soon afterwards, just in case there is another pandemic soon after, as some have suggested there might be. But once again, what we've had is a little bit of a hodgepodge of a system whereby effectively we've now got an inquiry which is set to, in theory, continue taking evidence until the summer of next year. Who knows how long it will take until they actually finish reporting on all the modules that they have. And then at the end of that process, we may not actually have any of those recommendations taken on, and it'll just be another report for the government shelf for its bookcase, really. And all that will have happened is a lot of taxpayers' money will have been burnt in the process. And so I really do think that the government needs to start getting a grip on this, not just on this inquiry, but inquiries in general. So that then the core focus of them is how are they delivering for taxpayers in the long term? And until they do that, then we're just going to continue to see costs spiral, which is simply unacceptable in a time like this.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. Darwin, thank you. It was brilliant. Enjoyed that. Darwin Friend there, Research Director at the Taxpayers Alliance.